Before we dive into this wild ride, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from? Maybe the sunny street in Southern California, a packed high-rise in downtown Chicago, or a calm farmhouse porch out in Kentucky. I love seeing just how far these Karen stories of chaos and karma can reach. The late afternoon sun painted the suburban street in golden hues, long shadows stretching across neatly trimmed lawns. From my living room window, I could see it again, the glint of metallic gray and deep burgundy stealing the space that wasn't theirs. My driveway, my property. Yet there they stood like trophies on display, a stealth gray Tesla Model 3 and a Dubonnet Rosso 1964 Aston Martin DB5. Two cars, parked side by side as if mocking me, their polished surfaces reflecting the orange glow of the sinking sun. The Tesla still hummed faintly, its engine cooling, as if it had only just been abandoned. The Aston Martin sat there silently, regal and heavy with history, its burgundy paint gleaming with an arrogance that wasn't even its own. I clenched my fists, the keys biting into my palm. For the third time that week, I was trapped, my own garage blocked by two women who thought the world spun only to serve them. I stepped outside, the air warm, the faint scent of fresh-cut grass still lingering from earlier in the day. My shoes crunched against the pavement as I approached the cars, my jaw tight. I knew who they belonged to. Kathy, 40 years old and self-satisfied, and her 85-year-old mother, Susan, who carried herself with the entitlement of someone who believed she had already beaten life at its own game. They were not from around here, not originally. Susan had floated into this neighborhood like a storm cloud drifting from another city, bringing her daughter along with her. Rumor had it Susan had lived a different kind of life before moving here, a life fueled by manipulation and wealth siphoned off old men too smitten or too lonely to see through her act. The most extravagant evidence of her success was parked right there in my driveway, the Aston Martin not bought, not earned, but gifted. The story, as it was pieced together from hushed conversations among neighbors, was simple and ugly. Susan had attached herself to a wealthy older man during her later years. He was lonely, vulnerable, and wealthy beyond imagination. She made him feel alive again, fed him sweetness, flattery, the illusion of love. And then, when the time came, she asked for what she truly wanted. Not his companionship, not his loyalty. A car. A rare, coveted 1964 Aston Martin DB5 in Dubonnet Rosso. A color so rich it seemed to bleed under the sunlight. She got it. And the moment the keys touched her hand, she ended it. Cut him loose, left him hollow. She vanished to another city, and soon after, she appeared here, living under the same roof as her daughter Kathy. Kathy, cut from the same cloth, had her own prize, a sleek Tesla, modern, quiet, and equally smug in its presence. Together, the two of them embodied entitlement. They didn't ask, they didn't compromise, they took. At first, I thought the parking issue was a mistake. The first time I saw Susan's Aston Martin blocking my driveway, I swallowed my irritation and knocked gently on their door. Kathy answered, her bright red blouse striking against her pale skin, her curly red hair falling across her shoulders. She looked me up and down as if I were an inconvenience. "Could you move the car?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Her smirk was immediate, practiced. "It's just for a bit. Relax." That bit lasted nearly 6 hours. By the time she moved it, I was late for work, forced to call my boss with excuses that sounded weak even to my own ears. The second time, it was Susan. She stood at her front step, pearls at her neck, handbag dangling from her wrist, as though she were on her way to a gala rather than unloading groceries. Her white hair was styled sharp and severe, her blazer perfectly pressed. When I asked politely if she could move the Aston Martin so I could get my car out, she didn't even look at me. "Back in my day," she said coldly, "men weren't so soft. They found ways around problems." I stood there stunned, half laughing in disbelief. Around problems? My own driveway wasn't a puzzle to navigate. It was mine, and they had turned it into their personal parking lot. It didn't stop there. Day after day, week after week, I'd find myself boxed in. Sometimes it was Kathy's Tesla angled just enough to make my garage inaccessible. Sometimes it was the Aston Martin sprawled across the curb and concrete like a lounging predator. And sometimes, like today, it was both. Each time, I tried to handle it civilly. Each time, I walked up to their door and knocked, repeating myself like some broken record. Could you move your car? I need to get out. This is my property. And each time, I was met with mockery, rolled eyes, or deliberate dismissal. Kathy once laughed in my face, tossing her curly hair back. It's not like we're hurting anyone, she said. It's just a driveway. Chill. But it wasn't just a driveway. It was the principle. It was my right to come and go from my own home without having to beg. The humiliation seeped deeper when neighbors began to notice. They'd see me knocking on Kathy's door again, hear Susan's sharp voice scolding me as though I were a misbehaving child. And while some whispered that it wasn't fair, none stepped in. Nobody wanted to go toe-to-toe with the Karen duo. One morning, I stood in my suit at the end of the driveway, briefcase in hand, staring at Kathy's Tesla blocking my car in yet again. My phone buzzed with reminders of a critical meeting, one I'd already been warned not to miss. Kathy opened her door, coffee in hand, sunglasses perched on her head. She didn't even acknowledge me at first, strolling casually to her car as though time belonged only to her. Could you please move it? I asked, my voice strained. She sipped her coffee, glanced at me, and smirked. Yeah, I'll get to it. After my call. She turned, walked back inside, leaving the Tesla sitting there like a gatekeeper. That day, I was late again. That day, I felt something inside me shift. The worst came on a weekend when my sister visited. She pulled up in her modest car, smiling, eager to spend the afternoon with me. But Susan was outside, standing proudly beside her Aston Martin parked across my driveway. My sister slowed, rolled down her window, and asked if she could pull in. Susan leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. Find another spot, sweetheart. This one's taken. Her voice was laced with disdain, as if my driveway were some prize she had won and now claimed. My sister looked at me helplessly, embarrassed, before circling around the block to find parking elsewhere. The shame burned hot in my chest as Susan smirked, lifting her chin in victory. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was deliberate. A power play. They weren't careless. They were cruel. Every blocked driveway, every dismissive comment, every smirk was their way of reminding me that in their minds, I didn't matter. My rights didn't matter. My driveway was theirs. And yet, even as anger surged through me, I forced myself to stay calm. Storming, shouting, threatening, it would only feed them. Kathy would record it, Susan would twist it, and I'd look like the villain. No. If they wanted a game, I would play it differently. That night, I sat in my car, staring at the glow of the street lamps spilling over their two vehicles, the Tesla sleek and modern, the Aston Martin timeless and cruel in its beauty. My keys rested in my hand, heavy, biting into my palm. I imagined the chains of a tow truck, the sound of tires grinding against a steel ramp, the sight of those arrogant faces watching their trophies disappear. The thought calmed me, steadied me. For now, I waited, watching the golden light fade into the shadows of night. But deep down, I knew the game was changing. They had crossed the line for the last time. And soon, I would be ready. The following week began with a storm disguised as sunshine. The mornings were bright, the air crisp, but the tension in my chest grew heavier with every glance toward my driveway. I had come to expect it, the sleek Tesla angled just enough to trap me in, or the gleaming Aston Martin sprawled like a relic guarding territory it had no right to claim. What had once been irritation had become a daily certainty, as inevitable as the rising sun. And with each passing day, my patience thinned to threads. One evening, I returned home late, headlights sweeping across the street. There they were, side by side, blocking the driveway completely. I pulled over and let the engine idle, my knuckles tightening around the steering wheel. Their silhouettes moved across their living room window. Kathy's laughter, sharp and piercing, floated through the glass. I killed the engine, stepped out, and walked toward the door, each step echoing with a mix of dread and determination. The door creaked open before I could knock. Susan emerged, draped in her pearl necklace, handbag dangling like a symbol of superiority. Her voice carried the weight of years spent sharpening words into blades. "You again," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "What is it this time?" I gestured to the cars. "My driveway. I need them moved." Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "You act as if you own the whole street." I bit back the urge to snap. "I own my driveway. That's all I'm asking." Before Susan could answer, Kathy appeared, her red blouse glowing under the porch light, curly hair spilling around her shoulders. She leaned against the doorframe, coffee cup in hand even at night, as though every moment was her stage. "Relax," Kathy said. "It's just a driveway. Don't be so dramatic." I stood frozen for a second, studying their faces, the smug assurance, the unshakable belief that they could do no wrong. And then I turned, walked away, and climbed back into my car. I sat there, engine off, eyes fixed on those two machines that had turned my life into a prison. By the next morning, I knew their behavior wasn't simply inconsiderate. It was deliberate. They enjoyed it. They thrived on it. Blocking my driveway was no accident. It was a ritual, their daily declaration of dominance. The days that followed became a spiral of escalation. Kathy parked her Tesla at sharper angles, smirking as I squeezed past her in frustration. Susan left the Aston Martin directly across the garage, daring me to challenge her. Once, I overheard Kathy speaking to a neighbor. "He gets so flustered," she said, laughing. "It's kind of entertaining, really." The neighbor chuckled nervously, unwilling to agree, but too cautious to oppose her. I clenched my teeth, the humiliation scorching through me. Every attempt to resolve the issue peacefully was met with failure. I left notes, polite, measured, asking them to respect the property line. They crumpled them, tossed them back onto my lawn. I called the HOA, hoping for backup, but Kathy sat on the committee and used her position to dismiss my complaint with a condescending smile. Even the police, when summoned, shrugged it off with a warning. Susan stood by, clutching her handbag, playing the role of an innocent elderly woman unfairly harassed by an impatient neighbor. "This is harassment," she said sweetly to the officer. "I'm 85. I can't walk far. Isn't a little kindness too much to ask?" The officer softened, offered her a sympathetic nod, and asked me to try and work it out amicably. I watched in disbelief as Kathy filmed the entire exchange on her phone, giggling under her breath. When the police left, Kathy turned her camera to me, her grin wide and cruel. "Smile for the internet," she mocked. "Maybe you'll go viral." It was then I realized no authority would help me. No committee, no badge, no sympathetic ear. I was alone in this, and if I didn't take matters into my own hands, it would never end. The breaking point came on a morning drenched in urgency. I had an important meeting, one that would decide the future of a project I'd spent months on. I dressed in my best suit, briefcase ready, heart pounding with focus. But when I stepped outside, my chest collapsed. Kathy's Tesla was sprawled across the driveway, Susan's Aston Martin angled behind it, sealing me in completely. I rushed to their door, knocking harder than I ever had before. Susan answered slowly, deliberately, her cruel smile spreading like frost. "I need them moved right now," I said, my voice sharp. She tilted her head. "Patience, dear. At my age, I move slowly." Kathy's voice called from inside, dripping with sarcasm. Maybe he should call the cops again. That was fun last time. The door shut in my face. I stood there, the world tilting with rage, the ticking of my watch pounding louder than my pulse. By the time they moved the cars, I had missed my meeting. Hours of preparation gone. An opportunity crushed. That night, sitting in the silence of my kitchen, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Anger alone wouldn't save me. Yelling would only feed their ego. But the law, though slow and indifferent, had rules. And rules could be used. I began my research, long nights spent scrolling through city ordinances, reading every clause on private property and obstruction. Buried within legal jargon, I found it. Blocking a private driveway was a towable offense, enforceable without the property owner's consent if reported. Not a warning, not a slap on the wrist. Immediate removal. I bought a small security camera, discreet and efficient, and mounted it above my garage. It watched silently, capturing every angle of my driveway, every trespass, every moment their cars squatted on my property. I saved the files, building a folder of evidence too solid to dismiss. Then I waited. Days passed, then weeks, each one fueling my patience. Each time they parked in my driveway, I let the camera record, never confronting them, never letting them suspect. The arrogance grew. Kathy boasted louder. Susan smirked harder, convinced they had broken me. But inside, I was sharpening my blade, waiting for the moment they gave me everything I needed. And then it happened. It was a Saturday evening, the sun draping the street in molten gold. I stood at my window, coffee cup in hand, when I heard the sound. Tires crunching against concrete, doors slamming. I stepped outside and saw it. Both cars, side by side, blocking my garage completely. The Aston Martin gleamed like blood under the sunset, the Tesla sleek and dark, their arrogance tangible. Susan stood proudly beside her car, adjusting her pearl necklace as if preparing for a photograph. Kathy leaned against her Tesla, scrolling through her phone, laughter echoing through the air. They didn't even notice me watching. I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket, the evidence stored, the law on my side. My hand hovered, trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the anticipation of justice. One call. That was all it would take. I looked at the two of them, basking in their own cruelty, and exhaled slowly. The moment I had waited for was here. The stage was set. My thumb slid across the screen, dialing the number. As the line connected and a voice answered, calm and official, a single thought burned steady in my mind. This was the beginning of their end. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and almost unreal as I explained the situation. My driveway was blocked. 2 vehicles. Repeated offenses. Evidence recorded. I gave the address, my tone steady but edged with the kind of anger that had simmered too long beneath the surface. When the dispatcher confirmed that officers and a tow service would be sent, I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. My hands were steady now, my chest lighter. The waiting was over. From the window, I watched as the minutes stretched into eternity. Susan and Kathy lingered outside, basking in their entitlement. Susan straightening her pearl necklace, as if her mere presence commanded respect. Kathy laughing at something on her phone, while the Tesla gleamed beside her. Neither of them had the faintest idea what was coming. Then came the sound. A low rumble in the distance, growing louder, more deliberate. The flashing of amber lights cutting across the street. A tow truck turned the corner, heavy chains rattling, the driver focused and efficient. Behind it, the dark silhouette of a police cruiser rolled up, headlights washing over the pavement. I stepped outside just as the vehicles pulled to a stop. The tow truck idled, its engine growling like some caged beast ready to be unleashed. The officers emerged first, 2 men in uniform, stern but calm. They approached me, and I handed over my phone. On the screen, video after video played. The Tesla and Aston Martin blocking my driveway. The dates, the times, each clip undeniable. The officer nodded, expression flat, and looked toward the 2 women still standing proudly beside their cars. Susan noticed first, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the police. Kathy followed, her face twisting in confusion, then indignation. "What's going on here?" Susan demanded, stepping forward with surprising speed for her age. "Why are you here?" The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, your vehicles are illegally blocking a private driveway. We have documentation of repeated violations. They're being towed." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending shockwaves through the quiet street. For a moment, there was silence, stunned disbelief carved into their faces. Then came the eruption. "You can't do this," Kathy shouted, her voice shrill. She rushed toward her Tesla, planting herself in front of the hood. "This is harassment. You have no right." The second officer stepped in front of her, his voice firm. "Step aside, ma'am. You've been warned multiple times. The law is clear." Susan's face twisted, fury and desperation clawing at her mask of superiority. I'm 85 years old. How dare you treat me this way? I need to park close to my home. This is discrimination. The first officer turned to her, his voice even colder. Age does not exempt you from the law. You've been warned before. The vehicles are being towed. The tow truck roared to life, the driver lowering the ramp with a grinding screech of metal on asphalt. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and raised voices. Curtains shifted, doors opened. Faces peeked out with thinly disguised curiosity. For once, the attention wasn't on me. It was on them. Chains clanked, heavy and merciless, as the driver secured the Aston Martin first. Its polished burgundy surface reflected the golden light, still gleaming with the arrogance of its owner. Susan lunged forward, clutching her handbag like a weapon. "You can't take that car," she screamed, her voice breaking. "That car is mine. Do you have any idea what it's worth?" The officer blocked her path, unmoved. "You should have considered that before parking it illegally. Step back." The winch engaged, steel groaning as the Aston Martin's wheels rolled reluctantly onto the ramp. Susan's shriek echoed through the street, sharp and raw, a sound stripped of dignity. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others exchanging knowing glances. The Queen had finally been dethroned, and everyone was here to see it. Kathy's outrage only grew. She pulled out her phone, recording furiously, narrating through clenched teeth. "This is illegal. Everyone look at this. My neighbor is having my car stolen by the police." She spun the camera toward me, her eyes wild. "You're going to regret this." But the officer cut her off. "That footage will only prove your violations. Put the phone down." The driver moved swiftly to the Tesla next. Chains snapped into place, the ramp groaning under its weight. Kathy tried to block him, arms spread wide, but the officers pulled her aside, her protest shrill and desperate. "This is my car," she cried. "I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you." The Tesla began its slow ascent, tires grinding, headlights flashing as though protesting its own capture. Kathy kicked the pavement, her voice breaking into sobs of rage. Susan stood frozen now, her face pale, her lips trembling as the Aston Martin loomed above her on the truck bed. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, the weight of her years finally visible. That car wasn't just a vehicle, it was her symbol, her prize, the last relic of her manipulative conquests. Watching it being chained and hauled away was watching her facade crumble. When both cars were secured, the driver raised the ramp with finality. The two vehicles, once symbols of power and entitlement, now sat like captured beasts ready to be taken away. The crowd of neighbors clapped quietly, a ripple of approval spreading across the street. I caught one man's eye. He gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that justice, at last, had been served. Kathy turned on me, her face streaked with rage. "You think this is over?" she spat. "You'll pay for this. Both of us will make your life hell." I didn't answer. I simply watched as the tow truck pulled forward, its amber lights flashing, carrying away the Aston Martin and Tesla into the fading light. The sound of chains rattling against steel echoed like a verdict, final and inescapable. Susan sank onto her front step, clutching her handbag, as if it were the last piece of dignity she had left. Her eyes followed the Aston Martin until it disappeared around the corner, her face collapsing in quiet devastation. Kathy stormed inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The officers turned to me, paperwork in hand. One of them said they'll need to pay significant fines and impound fees to get those cars back. Given the history, I doubt they'll risk parking here again. I nodded, a small, quiet satisfaction warming my chest. "Thank you." As the police left and the neighbors dispersed, the street grew quiet again, the golden hour fading into dusk. I stood in my driveway, the space finally clear, the silence heavy but peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me was truly mine again. But the story didn't end that night. Days later, word spread through the neighborhood of what followed. Susan had been forced to pawn jewelry to pay the impound fees. Her pride fractured as she bargained with shopkeepers. Kathy, weighed down by debt, struggled to reclaim her Tesla, only to lose it months later to repossession. Their arrogance had met its price, their cruelty its reckoning. And yet, as I stood on my porch, watching the quiet street under the pale glow of the street lamps, I knew something deeper lingered. Their humiliation was complete, their downfall undeniable. But entitlement, I realized, doesn't vanish so easily. The driveway was clear. My home was quiet. Justice had been served.